Stats SA has released its latest labour force report, and it doesn't look good. Unemployment is up by 1% in the first quarter of this year compared to Q4 in 2024, taking the number of unemployed to 8.2 million. Discouraged job seekers up by 7,000. Well, joining me now is COSATU Parliamentary Co-ordinator Mathew Parks. Thanks for making time to chat to us today. Were what these numbers?
No, I think it's quite a bit of a shock, quite a bit of a disappointment. With the expanded definition of unemployment has increased by 1.2% from the previous quarter, so it's now at 43.1%. So that's quite depressing. So this is for the first quarter of the year, so it reflects normally a little bit of a post-Christmas holiday, post-festive season slump, so to speak. There's normally quite a bit of a pickup in the fourth quarter of the year because that's Christmas. The retail sector, the tourism, the hospitality sectors have quite a bit of a pickup. But look, when we're having such high levels of unemployment, and you see that you're losing nearly 300,000 jobs in a quarter, that's not good news. That's quite depressing, especially when we have made some progress over the past year in terms of overcoming load shedding. And I think and a little bit of progress with regards to stabilization of transit. But, if anything, it has to be a real wake-up call, because if you're going to have 43% of society unemployed, 75% of young people unemployed, that is a ticking time bomb that one just simply cannot continue to normalize.
Yes. Now, what urgent actions do you propose to address this crisis in the country as COSATU?
I think for us, we've got to make sure that Eskom is able to provide affordable electricity. We've overcome load shedding, but the electricity is far too expensive, to be honest, from a great part of the economy, from mining, from manufacturing, from parts of the industrial sector. We've got to make sure that transit is not just stabilized, but is actually doubling its capacity to, in fact, going back to what it had in 1994, because that's key to unlocking the mining, the manufacturing, the agricultural sectors. We've got to make sure that the mining rights application system is finally modernized, because that's going to help unlock investment in the mining sector, which is the major source of employment. You've got to fix Metro Rail. There is progress around reopening Metro Rail lines, but that's key to boosting the urban economy. And so you see some progress there, but we've got to do it much faster.
Yes.
There's a significant infrastructure allocation in the budget, which hopefully gets passed soon. That's about R1 trillion. That's got to be expedited, because at times we've seen municipalities returning money unspent, roads, etc., deteriorating, water deteriorating. So we really do need to make the country into a construction site. But I think also, to be honest, local government remains a weak link. We've seen many municipalities, not just in rural areas, but even in our cities, deteriorating. And if they can't provide basic services, companies leave, investors pack their bags and go.
Sure.
And we do need to have a very frank discussion about how to ramp up investment support for industrialization, for export sectors from the public and the private sector, and really how to ramp up public employment programs to help provide a pathway for the youth to enter the labor market. We can't continue to normalize such high levels of unemployment. It's just an absolute disaster, to put it politely.
Now, you mentioned earlier, and it is something that COSATU labels the unemployment situation as a ticking time bomb, and you've called for a moratorium on retrenchments. Now, what other strategies are there that you are pursuing to address this?
I think for us, we have to fix the state. If you fix the state, you provide the public services, the businesses that workers, society depend upon, that helps. In particular, Eskom adds about 1% of GDP, Transnet and Metro Rail add another percent. If you could fix municipalities and some of the other frontline services like Home Affairs, you can then begin to take you to 3%. But also, we've had 1% economic growth rate for the past decade plus, for about 15 years. We really have to accept that the amount of money we spend on just industrialization, on giving financial support for SMEs, for export sectors, is a pittance. If we're allocating 30 billion rand for that, how do we expect that to turn things around when you have such stagnant levels of unemployment? So we really need to have a frank discussion with the banks, say can we increase it tenfold, to be honest. And similar to the public employment programs too. It made no sense for the past couple of years for Treasury to continue to cut what is spent on the presidential and other employment programs. We should really be saying how to increase that from 3 million to 5 or 6 million people within the next year, 2 years. So we have to kind of really treat the unemployment crisis like COVID-19 as an absolute disaster.
Apologies, I'm going to ask you to just hold it there for a bit. If you could just pause for a while. Now I'm going to go back now to COSATU Parliamentary Co-ordinator Mathew Parks. We were chatting about the latest labour force numbers. Are you still there?
Hi, yes, still here.
Apologies for that. Thank you.
No worries.
Now, what I want to ask you is about the youth unemployment remaining alarmingly high. How do you interpret the latest data on youth in the labour market? Do you have plans to advocate for programs like expanded internships or other programs to address this?
No, it's beyond even depressing. It's beyond scary to have 3 out of 4 young people unable to find work. That really shows our futures in very delicate terms. I think for us, a couple of things. Number one is to expand the public employment programs. That's a useful way to help young people get experience, to earn the skills, training, and confidence needed to find work, to earn a minimum wage as well. Because often your first job is the most difficult one to find. Once you find the first job, you should be able to find other jobs.
Yeah.
But we do need to have a frank review of the public employment programs, because some of them have been little more than digging trenches. We need to really make sure that they are linked to post-employment opportunities for people afterwards. We do need to have a discussion about how do you ramp up artisanship, internship programs to the private sector, and even to avail public resources to them. For example, that fund some public employment programs. They can tap into that. Go back to some of the old internships, artisanship programs that many companies, especially in the industrial sector, had used historically. That's key. We also need to have a thorough view of the skills that we're providing for at our schools, at the TVET colleges, at universities. Are they really linked to the skills that employers need in the private sector? Because it makes no sense for employers to say they have a shortage of long-distance truck drivers and they need to go to neighboring countries to look for them when they have huge levels of unemployment, especially in our townships. It makes no sense. The graduation rate or the throughput rate for TVET colleges is, I'm told, is about 10%. So it means 90% of people entering these TVET colleges are not finishing the courses they complete.
Yes.
That should be raising alarms, because we're spending huge amounts of money on this,
Yes.
and we're not making a dent in unemployment. And 30 years into democracy, we should not be continuing to do what we've been doing. We should really be readjusting and doing so quite quickly.
Are there any specific trends that you've identified in the latest report, like wage disparities?
Look, the most difficult thing with wage disparities is that when you have such high levels of unemployment, people are willing to sacrifice their labour rights out of desperation. Employers know they can exploit people's vulnerability, ignore the labour rights, ignore the minimum wage, especially in sectors like agriculture, construction, hospitality, restaurants, domestic workers. Often the rights, the minimum wage rights, are simply ignored. And that's the inevitable challenge when you have such high level unemployment. So we do need to be having a discussion to say, how can we increase the capacity of the Department of Labour to really have more inspectors to ensure that all employers are abiding by what they're required to pay employees. And you've seen as a consequence, many employers have actually chosen to hire undocumented migrant workers, knowing they can exploit the vulnerability. And that's creating another powder keg, because if you have such high levels of unemployment, yet you see significant sectors for low-skilled workers like restaurants or the petrol stations, etc., hiring migrant workers, it creates real friction which we simply can't afford, because it will explode into xenophobic violence if we don't get things moving. But I think for us, the real solution is there's a multiplicity of things we need to do, but we need government working with business and labour to treat this crisis of unemployment and low economic growth the same way we treated COVID-19. If we treat it as a national emergency, if we work together collectively as government, as social partners, throwing every possible resource at the problem and removing the blockages, we can turn things around. We can turn things around within the next year, 2 years.
Yeah.
But what we can't continue to do is business as usual.
I'm going to ask you something that might be quite controversial or be seen that way. Later on in the show, I'm going to be interviewing a professor from one of the universities in the country. Are universities doing enough to prepare graduates for the job market, and should they not be focusing more on their entrepreneurial skills and opening their own businesses when they leave varsity?
You're 100% right on both fronts. I think many universities are simply content to give you and to teach you as a number, because the university population, for good measure, has doubled in the last 30 years. But I think we should, if we want to look at a good example, let's look at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, CPUT, where as part of the training program for all degrees, they have to go and do internships at an employer. The university helps link them to that employer. They've got to do practical sessions all the time as part of the formal academic curriculum. So that means when those kids leave university, leave CPUT, they arm not just with a piece of paper and the qualification, but they have 1,000+ hours of practical experience.
Yes.
Often they walk into that same employer where they did their internship and are employed immediately. That's the model we need to roll out across our TVET, across our universities.
Yes.
But also to say the practical skills of knowing how to use a computer, having a driver's license, the basic communication skills, knowing how to type, whatever.
Life
Those
skills.
are the skills that our schools or universities should teach people. Life skills, essentially, yes. But you're right also, and as much as I'm a social science graduate, we need to have more students doing engineering, doing sciences, doing the practical skills which can unlock the economy and also enable them to become employers too, because not everybody can or should be working for the state or can or should be working for another employer. We really need to also say, how do you help support people who are unemployed to set up their own businesses? So, for example, we have people, unemployed people, homeless people often, or living in shacks, collecting refuse for recycling. That's a fantastic thing. Why are we not giving them support to set up their own little cooperatives or SMEs, giving them financial support, linking them to the formal sector to take it off? Similarly with people in rural areas who've got farming skills. Why not assisting them to be given land, to get access to capital, link them to the employment programs, but also link them to markets, to retailers too, to buy the vegetables, the fruits, the products they can grow in their own small holdings. So we need to think things much more creatively.
Absolutely, and a lot of initiatives that need to be looked at, and certainly some questions I'll be asking that professor a little bit later on the show. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much, Mathew Parks from COSATU Parliamentary Co-ordinator.